Welcome to another episode of Fear the Old Lore, where we look at the English and Japanese versions of games for more insight into their lore. One of the most difficult aspects of translating from one language to another is trying to preserve all the relevant information of the source text in a way that's easily understood in the target language. It's surprisingly easy for things to fall between the cracks, and even technically accurate translations can have things which are lost in translation. This doesn't necessarily mean a translator did a poor job or was negligent, but sometimes certain aspects of a language just can't be carried over into another language and continue to sound natural or flow well. At times, seemingly irrelevant bits of information can have more meaning in broader contexts, but without specific direction, it's really easy to miss these small details. Conversely, there are also times these kind of small details can end up as red herrings, where they might seem really important at first, but end up becoming irrelevant later. Because From Software's games are so cryptic, each individual word can have a tremendous amount of significance. This makes it a nightmare to translate, since seemingly innocuous things can have a large impact on the lore, or just end up being nothing at all. It's really up to the audience to decide for themselves, but sometimes they are preemptively locked out of accessing some theories due to not having access to all relevant information. One example of this is that pyromancy comes from Jujutsu, which when broken down literally is something like curse technique. We don't have a way to phrase that concisely in English, and while Jujutsu obviously doesn't mean fire magic, the localizers may not have wanted to call them curse techniques to avoid confusion with the curse mechanic. Since most of these spells are affiliated with fire, it makes sense from a practical standpoint to call them pyromancies, but it's unfortunate we lose its potential affiliation with curses as a result. For what it's worth, while Jujutsu does literally mean curse technique, the term is a little more disambiguated today and typically means magic somewhat generically. It's not uncommon for a word's meaning to change over time though, and pyromancy, for example, has Greek roots with pyre meaning fire and mantia meaning divination. So while pyromancy literally means fire divination, the way it's used today gives it the meaning of controlling and manipulating fire. Just like pyromancy with fire divination, Jujutsu is given more meaning beyond curse technique, though it still retains some of those connotations today as exemplified by anime and manga like Jujutsu Kaisen. If Jujutsu is supposed to link pyromancy to curses in Dark Souls, it could imply pyromancy is meant to be linked to the undead curse in the Darksign as well. With the undead curse linked to life by endlessly reviving the dead, it could cast more light on the fundamental nature of pyromancy and help characterize spells like Rapport, Poison Mist, and Toxic Mist. This isn't to say calling Jujutsu pyromancy is a bad choice. Fire is symbolic of life the world over, so even if pyromancy is meant to be linked to the curse of life, it's still represented well with fire, and in spells like Undead Rapport of Dark Souls 1, the connection is made explicit by saying the living are lured by flame. Even so, one thing which interests me about this topic is how the fundamental nature of pyromancy changed over time. According to the Izalith and Demon Catalysts, the Witch of Izalith and her Daughters of Chaos used flame sorcery instead of pyromancy before they conjured the Chaos Flame. Considering how Quaylon is the mother of pyromancy, it's curious she didn't pass on her flame sorceries to Solomon, and it's made me wonder why. Were flame sorceries permanently altered by the creation of the Chaos Flame? Was Solomon unable to learn them because he's undead and affected by the power of the curse? Or is it just easier for the undead to use pyromancy? With the earliest pyromancers being called conjurators, or curse masters in Japanese, it could reinforce that pyromancy is meant to be connected to the curse. Even if pyromancy is connected to curses, one of the most confusing aspects of it is how the Great Swamp Ring and Izalith Pyromancy Tome of Dark Souls 3 say they originated from the Chaos Flame, and Chaos Pyromancies gave birth to all later forms of pyromancy. I would have thought pyromancy descended from flame sorceries first, but it appears not to be the case. I don't necessarily believe this, but it's made me wonder if Chaos is tied to the Darksign or the Undead Curse. After all, Chaos is traditionally scaled with humanity, and the Undead Curse's ability to revive people is similar to how demons were reborn from a twisted bed of life, or how Seething Chaos describes chaos as scraps of life. It may be that the Witch of Izalith could have had a role in creating the Darksign for the gods, but that would have been before she was turned into the Bed of Chaos. Correlation doesn't imply causation, and it's just as likely the way chaos consumes everything is an intrinsic property of fire and life in these games. Power Within says excessive power eats away at the life force of its caster, and the terminology used to describe how it eats away at things is present in the way the dark, poison, and curses gnaw through the core of one's being. The Japanese version of Chaos Bed Vestiges connects the ideas further, and says the reason the demons are being undone is precisely because of the heat of the flames they bear within them. If I were to make a kind of definitive statement about chaos, I'd say it's the result of excessive power or trying to wield more power than one can control. This principle is on display in weapons like the Chaos Blade and Lost Sword, where they damage the wielder for each attack, and the lava left behind by Chaos Pyromancies is representative of their excess power. Attempting to recreate the first flame created a power the Witch of Izalith and her daughters couldn't control, and it's why they became twisted and consumed into the bed of chaos. It's a modern retelling of the fable of Icarus, who flew too close to the sun and died. If it weren't for Izalith's Lord Soul saying the Chaos Flame was a result of trying to recreate the first flame with her soul, I'd assume she may have tried to use darkness to fuel it, kind of like how offering humanity to a bonfire with the rite of kindling can reinforce the heat of an Estus flask. It would work well in trying to explain why chaos scales with humanity, but if chaos scales with excess life or power in general, there isn't an explicit need to connect it to darkness. It could just scale with having excess power. Thus, having excess humanity leads to having excess power that chaos can make use of. It's annoying we aren't given a reason why flame sorceries vanished, especially with Quailana still present in 1. It's possible the Chaos Flame altered her into not being able to cast them any longer, but there's really nothing to support or deny this. If it weren't for Quailana referring to her own spells as pyromancies, I'd almost believe she still casted flame sorceries, and undead like Salaman cast pyromancy instead. Even so, the distinction between pyromancy and flame sorceries remains unclear. While I'd like to say pyromancy is linked to the undead curse, or curses in general because of its name in the Conjurator set, Laurentius talks about using pyromancy before he turned undead. Of course, it's possible he was channeling the power of the curse before he died, but these inconsistencies are worth pointing out, especially if Quailana uses pyromancy but isn't technically undead herself. So is there supposed to be an explicit connection between pyromancy and curses? Maybe. Maybe not. There are reasons to argue for and against it, and it's important to have all relevant information available when coming to our own conclusions, but it's unfortunate some of it gets lost in translation. This isn't meant as a jab against the translators. It's unclear how relevant things like this are meant to be, and even with all this information, it's still debatable how it's meant to fit into everything. When we take into consideration that all of these systems had to be established in Dark Souls 1 without the context of 2 and 3 to support it, the translators did an admirable job of calling them pyromancies. Regardless, maybe these revelations can help other lore enthusiasts draw more new interesting conclusions about the games in the future. If this has helped reshape how you think about pyromancy, flame sorceries, or chaos, or if you've got your own interpretation, feel free to let me know in the comments section. If you can't get enough lore and want to discuss more, also feel free to join the Discord server linked in the channel description. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Please consider the normal YouTube nonsense of liking and sharing this video to help out with the algorithm. I'd also like to give special thanks to all my patrons, channel members, viewers, commenters, and subscribers. Your support makes it easier to continue these projects, and I look forward to producing more. Fear the old lore.